Okay, we're gonna try to do this kind of a walking vlog. It's pretty windy out here. I don't know if it's gonna work. But the other night I saw Obsession. This is after about a month of it playing in theaters. I work at a movie theater, so I had a front row seat to watch this movie that looked to me kind of like a pretty basic Blumhouse slop kind of movie turn into this huge obsession among a certain generation, and I finally saw it. And I want to talk about what I thought, because personally, I've had a really hard time understanding what made this movie so popular. Like, how did it grab the zeitgeist? How did it just like? I'm talking to people, friends of friends, who have gone to see this movie multiple times, and I truly have trouble figuring it out. Um, so this is going to be kind of like a long rant. This is really not a review. It's going to be full of spoilers. Um, and I'm just going to talk about the ways that I think that this movie kind of fails to be the sort of deep or introspective or timely message movie that, that I think is being made out to be in the media. So here we go. Part one. Obsession isn't actually about obsession. Yeah, if you're scratching your head, strap in, because it's going to be a long walk. By the way, The Long Walk is a great, fantastic movie, and it didn't get its proper due. So if you want to know what I'm going on about, where I'm saying there's better movies out there, watch The Long Walk. Please do me a favor and yeah. Okay. Obsession isn't actually about obsession. We've got two characters in this movie that are obsessed, quote unquote. The big one and the obvious one is Nikki. Freaky Nikki is the girl who is head over heels in love with our boy Bear because of a magical wish that he made. And she does a lot of creepy things because she's obsessed with him. I could have picked maybe a less windy day to try to do this. But Nikki's actions are not motivated. So we'll talk about that. The other character who is possibly obsessed, and this is that kind of like higher level hot take that people have walking out of the theater, is that like, oh no, perhaps it is Bear who is the obsessed one after all. He started all of this by making his incredibly selfish wish. We'll talk about that too, because I don't think Bear is obsessed either. Let's start with Nikki, because when I say that this movie is not about obsession, the first thing that my friends tell me is like, what, are you high? Nikki was obviously obsessed with Bear. It's just like, okay, let's unpack this for a second. Because I realize that personally, there are a lot of movies that I enjoy. Some of my favorite movies of all time are movies about obsession. People who are either romantically or otherwise obsessed with another person. And I was going to list some here. The Prestige was my favorite movie for many years. A movie about two men who are obsessed with revenge, with their rivalry, to the point where it destroys themselves and multiple lives around them. Right? That's kind of a fun example. Gone Girl, I think, is a great example if you want to talk about obsession within a relationship and someone who is like acting aberrantly. And Gone Girl talks a lot about sort of the multiple aspects of this relationship and what leads these characters to behave the way that they do. What a great movie. There's a lot of great movies out there about obsession. Obsession is not one of them. That is my point. If you're more of a TV watching guy, though, there's a lot more direct, relatable examples. We've got You is a movie that's all about a psychopathic serial murderer who is has obsessive fixation on women. And if you're looking for something that's a little more gross out horror, I would also recommend Hannibal. The Hannibal show is kind of fantastic for that, because it is also about weird psychopathic behavior, some very interesting gross out stuff. And it also happens to be eventually about an obsessive relationship between the two protagonists, Hannibal and Will Graham. So So what makes all of these examples great examples of characters who are obsessed, and why is Freaky Nikki not one of them? Well, in each case, these stories are ultimately about trying to understand a character who is driven by some compulsion to do horrible and extreme acts, right? That is the tragic formula of a tale about obsession. You have these characters who are doing things that no normal human would do. Why are they doing them? Well, we explore that, and it dares you to actually empathize with these people. You know, they may not have healthy brains, but you can still kind of understand why it is that they are doing the things that they are doing. And that is, I think, has some sort of thematic, maybe even social value as works. Okay, so Nikki is Freaky Nikki, right? As we'll call her possessed form, which is what we see through most of the movie. Freaky Nikki is obviously doing extreme things that are very disturbing. And yeah, why can't we relate to her? My big issue is that I think that her actions are largely unmotivated. Now, you can say that a lot of what she does in the movie is the result of jealousy and insecurity, right? And I think that fits for a lot of it. You know, he's gonna kiss another girl and then she like has a freak out, or he wants to go do something without her and she like loses her mind. You know, these are indicators of a codependent relationship, sure. But as often we get scenes of horror that just make no actual sense. I'm gonna list two. So the first one that stands out to me is the peeing on the rug scene. So the setup is, of course, that Bear has a work shift. She doesn't have a work shift. She has to stay home alone. Bear leaves without her. She's duct taped to the door, which is a pretty fun little visual metaphor. He has to yank the door open. And then she kind of stands there putting on the creepy girl smile that is in every single Blumhouse movie. And then she pees on the rug. He comes back like 6 hours later or whatever, and she's thrown up on herself for some reason. It's not explained. The implication is that she just sits there waiting all day for him to return, vomiting on herself. And this is not, again, something that any normal brain would do, right? And ultimately, you're like, okay, these people are crazy, they're obsessed, so it's not normal. But like, realistically, this is a signifier that this character is not a character, right? Ultimately, I think my point is that Freaky Nikki is not a character. She is some sort of weird love zombie. And her actions are not meant to be examined or understood. They're literally just there to give you the willies, right? The second example is the cat sandwich, which I think is quite interesting. This cat keeps coming up in the story. The cat sandwich especially is, I don't know. It was a baffling scene for me. We'll talk about it. Nikki makes Bear lunch when he's away during the day. He's eating the sandwich. The reveal is that the sandwich actually contains the remains of his dead cat. We get another instance with the dead cat very early on the first night that Nikki gets possessed. She makes like some sort of creepy shrine for the dead cat with the body of the dead cat. This is supposed to be like, well, it's supposed to be disturbing. It is disturbing. It's supposed to indicate that she doesn't really understand human emotion, which is that's an aspect of these like sort of deranged individuals. The thing with the dead cat, though, is that I don't think there is any version of a sick mind that would feed someone their dead cat and not mean it as some sort of like hateful act. But at this point in the movie, he has done nothing to deserve her ire. Like, he hasn't been cheating on her. She's not getting revenge on him for anything specifically. It's just like deranged, right? It's just like, ooh, that's super gross. Oh my God, why would someone do that, right? It's there to introduce a scene where he can actually confront her about doing something that he doesn't like. Of course, we get a lot of those scenes because she's constantly doing weird, fucked up shit. But this is what I mean. In one of the seasons of You, there's like a parasocial stalker for one of the characters, and they're talking about how like this woman has decided that they have this whole relationship and they got matching tattoos and stuff, and she sees that the girl that she's obsessed with doesn't have the tattoo, and you can tell that she's like living in this fantasy world. She thinks that this girl got it removed, so she's going to tattoo this woman, right, to get the tattoo back. And that's fucked up, but we're shown like there is a logical sequence of notions that leads to this fucked up behavior. Cat sandwich is just bro, how fucked up with the, oh bro, oh that's so nasty, oh we have to put that in the movie. Speaking of cats, hey Bean, I'm walking with company today. So what we're left with, if the movie isn't a realistic depiction of an obsessed girl in love, then the actual horror becomes incurious dude bro horror of like, yo, what if this girl was crazy, right? And that bothers me. I think that's insulting to, should be insulting to anyone, because ultimately that's a very common mindset, right? Live in a world where a lot of people are in terrible relationships or do terrible things to one another because they just don't actually give a shit what is motivating the other person that they're dating, right? And then you get into situations where it's like, you know, bruh, why did she throw my Xbox out the window? She's just crazy, bruh. And it has nothing to do with the fact that you like, were flirting with your sister or whatever. Anyway, critical take number 2. Bear is actually the obsessed one. I like this one a lot because people walking out of the movie are often going like, bruh, that girl was crazy, bruh. And then the date that they brought with them, she's like, well, she didn't really do anything wrong. I mean, he's the one who... And in a better movie, I think that would be the case. We were talking about tragic story arcs, and the reality is that, yes, the horrors that come in a horror movie make more sense if it's some sort of karmic retribution for a character flaw in the protagonist. And we see this in a lot of really good movies. This is not one of them, but it's telling that the audience kind of wants it to fit. Like, they want to read that extra level into it. But let's break it down. Okay. A disclaimer too. When I was talking to my partner about this, there was some mention that it could just be a generational thing, and this is very possible, right? Like, different attitudes about relationships, male expectations and gender expression and stuff might mean that I am looking at this from a lens that is dated, but whatever. You're watching my, breakdown, so we're gonna do it. So the argument for this perspective, the idea that Bear is actually the one who's obsessed, comes down to a few things. One, he is emotionally very hung up on this girl. The movie opens with him basically pouring his heart out to a girl who's doing a stand-in for Nikki, where he's just being like 100% emotionally vulnerable. And that's creepy. Number 2, when he's alone at night, he's scrolling through her Instagram and looking at her cute selfies. The third part is actually the most compelling example, and I think it's the scene when she sort of is communicating to him while Freaky Nikki is asleep. She's sleep talking, and he asks her, "Is being with me so bad?" Okay, I took a break and now the sun came out, so I'm gonna be squinting hard through the rest of this. Sorry about that. All right, so point by point. First part, emotional mushiness. Our boy, the movie starts with him, again, pouring his guts out, and he's saying some very sweet things, but they are also, this is where I think the generational difference probably comes in. Personally, his speech would be right at home at the end of any, turn of the century romantic comedy where the protagonist just, is fully emotionally vulnerable with the object of their attraction, and then she gives him a big messy kiss. I don't think that that's necessarily true to life, and I think there's supposed to be an element of this scene that is a little bit cringy, but the reality of it is that immediately following his emotional confession to the waitress, we see his buddy, is it Ian? I forget the guy's name. But we see his buddy say like, dude, that was gross. That was offensive. Like, she would hate that. Never do that again. His retort, his follow-up suggestion is that you should basically insult her, because that's how like people flirt, is they're just like casually mean to one another, which I think is supposed to be an indication that his friend is full of shit, and his friend kind of is full of shit. And two, that this guy is like a sweet, soft-hearted guy. Bear, he's a soft-hearted kid who's just like insecure and is uncomfortable with expressing himself. And this is the reason why he's never been able to work up to actually asking Nikki out. Right? That's his sin in this moment. So I think that we're supposed to see that scene and think, wow, this is a genuine guy. But who knows? I'm not Gen Z, I'm not Gen Alpha. Maybe I'm misreading that scene. But I think using the language of like movies and storytelling, to me it seems like this is this guy's problem. This is his setup. He wants to confess his love to a girl, but he's too afraid to do it. And these are the reasons why he's being blocked. He's surrounded by people that are basically telling him it's a bad idea, you're going to get yourself hurt, and what's worse is you're going to mess up our friendship dynamic and trivia night, which is actually what his buddy cares about. Point number 2, he stalks her Instagram. This is fucking crazy to me. And again, maybe this is generational, but honestly, social media exists for people to post gross selfies and for other people to grossly stalk them. That's just like, if that is a sin, then your entire generation, anyone who owns Instagram or social media of any kind, deserves to go to jail. So I really don't buy this one at all. We don't see him. He's not like saving the pictures to a private folder. He's not like, taking screenshots. He's not like copy pasting her face onto porn star bodies or anything like that. Like, he's just sort of mournfully liking her pics, which is, I think, the reason why people fucking post pics on social media. I personally think it's pathetic, but that's, again, social norms. I don't think that can count as creepy. So I'm writing that one off. Okay, the final and most compelling argument, the idea that he knows that Nikki is being tortured and is being trapped and is being held in this relationship against her will, and he doesn't care so long as he gets to have sex with her. This is compelling largely for that scene that I mentioned, and also probably for the best scene in the movie, which is when he's in the car and he's calling the help desk for the Make-A-Wish Foundation thing. But yes, so the setup is that she's sleep talking, and he's like, is it so bad being with me? And her answer is like, I've never been with you, Bear. Which implies that, again, that he is actually dating this weird, sick love zombie, and it has nothing to do with the woman that he's actually infatuated with. My counter argument is that, yeah, he's pathetic, but also when we see what his options are at this point in the movie, he doesn't actually have any good ones, right? Every time he tries to fix the situation, and he tries to like talk to her reasonably, he tries to talk to the Make-A-Wish people, and every single time that he's confronted with this, like, the answer is like, there's really nothing you can do, or you could kill yourself, which, if we're being honest, is not helpful information. That's not an option to 99% of people. Most people, I don't think, actually have what it takes within them to self-sacrifice for someone, even someone they profess to love unconditionally. But giving someone a do or die scenario choice, you might as well just say, no, there's nothing you can do, because it's going to be the last possible out that someone would take. So you can say that, like, yeah, he's creepy. He is. I also think he's relatably creepy. If you understand the situation, this is a person, if you've ever had like an infatuation, or infatuation is too strong. If you ever liked someone, you really wanted them to like you back, and then you found yourself in a situation where they like obviously really, really did like you back. But there's a catch, and that catch is that's like, they're also very creepy. I think your first instinct wouldn't be to, kill yourself. I think your first instinct would be to try to fix the situation. And that's kind of what we see him doing. Once he realizes the full gravity of how fucked up things are, he starts to take more and more drastic measures. But he's also a very passive person. He doesn't have a lot of doesn't have a lot of drive. It's the reason why he couldn't ask her out in the first place. It's the reason why he made the wish. So that one I don't fully buy either, because in that case, his sin is just liking someone. Ultimately, I don't think that's an obsession. I think that's a crush. Like, he's crushing on this girl, and there's a difference. So we've debunked the reasons why I think the arguments for him being obsessed are kind of silly. But let's talk about all of the examples that were given that they actually have a pretty healthy relationship, because it's weird. I think it's very easy to write a character who is toxic, creepy in a non-ideal relationship, and we see that all over the place. It's actually really hard to write someone or write a relationship that comes across as authentic, and I think that's partly because a lot of people don't ever experience authentic relationships. But let's break it down, because I think what we see of their relationship before things go crazy in the movie is actually fairly healthy. So first things first, when we are getting the mushy confession at the beginning of the movie, he's not talking about how beautiful she is on the outside. I mean, I think he mentions that she is, but his entire confession is based on her kindness, her sensitivity, the shared moments when they were emotionally vulnerable with each other. You know, apparently he had a death, his grandmother died, and she was there for him. And yeah, he can't stop thinking about her, but it's also as a result of these shared experiences that they have. We get further evidence that their relationship is like fairly reciprocal when they're he's driving her home and they're having their first conversation about like love and attraction that we see in the movie. And she's talking about her writing career. This is her creative outlet, and she confesses to him that he's like one of the only people that she can be honest with this part of herself too. Just honest with about this part of herself, which implies not only that he wants to be close to her and wants to be a good friend to her, but that she also reciprocates. She also trusts him with a part of herself that she doesn't really get to trust other people with. The only problem with his crush is the fact that we don't get the sense that she actually has any kind of physical attraction to him. And we find out later that she's actually been banging his best friend. So, you know, but I don't think that there's anything gross or creepy about that aspect, about his actual feelings towards her. There's other indications that he's not obsessed, and I don't think that these were intentional, or this specific example was intentional. I think it's just maybe an accident of another aspect of the movie, but it does kind of defeat the argument, so we're going to go into it. And that is the fact that dude is not single-minded about his affections for her. We're given an example super early when he comes home and finds his cat dead. Now, what was set up before the cat death scene was that he wants to ask Nikki out at this group trivia night thing that they do on Wednesdays. So he's kind of working himself up to do this, even though his friend really doesn't want him to. And then he finds his cat is dead. It's an emotional scene. He cries. He's going through it. And when Nikki calls him up to ask him about trivia night, the night that he plans to go do this thing, he says no, right? Like, he's not so single-mindedly hot for her that he's willing to ignore the very real tragedy in his life to, go pursue her. Even after, it takes kind of a ticking clock situation. She tells him that she's actually quitting the job, that they won't be hanging out anymore. And that sort of tips it over for him to think that, like, okay, well, I kind of have to get over this. If I'm going to make a move, I have to make a move now. But again, to me, that doesn't sound like the mindset of an obsessed person. Okay, let's take a brief interlude to talk about things that I did like about the movie, because there were a couple things, so it's only fair that I talk about those too. First one is actually kind of a backhanded compliment. I think that there were a couple scenes in the movie that were genuinely codependent horror, which is what I'm going to call the uncomfortable feeling that you get when you're in a relationship with someone who is clearly a little bit unstable. This, I don't know. I think that, like, when you are watching a movie, you're resonating with moments of honesty. At least when I watch a movie, I'm looking for moments of honesty. And in this particular movie, I only thought that there were two moments to me that struck as like, okay, this is based off of like actual firsthand experience with someone who is like unhealthy, like an unhealthy relationship. Scene one, Nikki in the shower, trying to have a conversation through a closed door, the water running, and he's trying to go to a party without her. So he's like, you need to stay here. I'm gonna go. We need a little bit of space. Plus, you weren't invited. And she has a total freak out. Been there. But I think that's a good indicator of, like, yeah, uncomfortable relationships where one person feels like they're being ignored for the other. In this case, it's like justifiable because, again, she's not a person. She's a love zombie. But yeah, scene two is the late night texting scene. So Nikki's passed out and he's getting a text from Sam or Sarah. I honestly can't remember. But the actually hot friend who is into him is sending him late night texts, giving him kind of an ultimatum. And he's sort of trying to answer them, but he knows and the audience knows that if Nikki wakes up and sees these texts with this girl, that she's going to become homicidal. And I think that mirrors some real world tension that I think a lot of people out there have experienced, where you are, again, in like a toxic relationship and being accused of emotionally cheating, things like that. So, two examples of real world tension. I do think that this is a bit backhanded, as I said before, because in a movie called Obsession, I think those were really the only two times that I felt like there was any kind of actual real world horror injected into this plot. Thing I like number two, there's definitely a couple moments where the writing is genuinely funny, and I really do appreciate that when it happens. Specifically, I think when he's first coming to grips with his new freaky Nikki girlfriend, he's begging her to act normal in a way that, again, probably makes a lot of sense from like a dude bro perspective of just be normal, stop being creepy. And he says, stop walking weird or stop moving weird, which I think is great because one of the horror tricks that this movie pulls is that they do a bunch of like quirky little camera tricks that fast forward sped up motion or like filmed in reverse motion that gives this like very creepy stop animation look to the way that she moves from time to time. And it's so eerie in this very like The Exorcist kind of way where you're just like, yeah, that's not human. But also there's really no way to describe it. So the fact that he sort of calls attention to it and lampshades it in the when he's talking to her, like, stop like moving weird, I thought that was pretty funny. Also, I think when the best friend uses his wish for $1 billion and just starts raining money on him, thought that was pretty funny. Like, I don't know. It's definitely like one of those things where they're taking the premise and running with it, but in a way that is just like a great visual gag because I've got $1 billion, and then you're just like, wow, the horror of the situation is actually like dawning on everyone involved. So, not bad. The last thing that I want to give the movie credit for is I do like the ending. I did think that it did catch me by surprise. So his like last minute gambit is that he's got a bunch of those wish sticks and he bought one and he's going to try to compel her to use it to undo his wish because she'll do anything for him. So he tries that, it's not really working. He eventually locks himself in the bathroom and is trying to figure out how to commit, suicide. And then as he's doing it, you hear the little like audio cue jingle in the background, which I think is also funny that if this is like a prop from the 70s or the 80s, that kids today think that they had like singing birthday cards from back then. Like, yeah, it's cute, guys. We had those in the 90s, but anyway, whatever. So, um, but you hear the little audio jingle and then you hear the snap and then his entire demeanor changes and you're just like, oh, of course, what would she be wishing for? She wants him to love her as unconditionally as she loves him. And then what we get after that is just like the most delightful, like little meet cute romantic moments where the two of them are just gazing at each other and giggling. And it's so sweet because it's undercut by the fact that they're both like covered in blood and they're in like a literal hellhole. I think that was kind of clever. Then you get that like whole Romeo and Juliet reference thing, which is pretty obvious, but like whatever, you know. I think that was like as good as any way to wrap things up because at that point in the movie, I was just kind of waiting for it to end, and I was pleasantly surprised. Like, plus you get the friend for some reason shows up. He's like, "Bro, I got $1 billion." He just shoots him. That was also kind of a funny little stinger for the finale. So yeah, I didn't mind the ending so much. There was I've heard a lot of like fanficky nonsense where people were like, "Oh yeah," and the director said that like in the sequel she's gone to jail for multiple murders and stuff. And to me, I didn't care enough about the characters or about the plot for that to matter. Like, sure, whether she goes to jail or whether she straps a gun to her hip and takes down the Make-A-Wish Foundation in some bloody act of revenge for the sequel, I think either case is equally stupid and pointless. Because again, I don't think this movie had a point to begin with. So, so there's the stuff I liked. Let's talk about some stuff that I thought kind of sucked. Personally, and this is nitpicky, I've already mentioned my issues with the general plot structure, lack of theme, but there were a couple scenes in the movie that I specifically just wanted to end. Or things that stood out to me is like, this is like distractingly dumb. The cat dying with the oxycodone. Like, yes, you introduce it, you set up that the oxycodone is there, that's eventually how he kills himself at the end, so it's set up and payoff, but you're forced to, as a cat owner, contest with the reality that somehow this cat got these pills that we see he keeps in his medicine cabinet in a child-proof pill container, and the cat somehow got it open and spilled it onto the floor and mixed it in with its food and then ate it and died. Not a problem necessarily, it doesn't break the movie, but it is distracting for me, where I'm just kind of like, what the hell happened here? Like, did he leave opened pills, a pill container? And then it begs the question, people try to rationalize this. You get into cases of like, oh, well, maybe he was so depressed that he wanted to kill himself, so he had the oxycodone out on the table, and I don't buy that shit either, because it's convenient. It doesn't match anything else that we're shown in the movie, and it's a huge logical leap that you have to go through to just justify some sort of lazy writing. As soon as they're playing party Jenga at the party, the whole party scene I felt like went on for way too long, because as soon as the scene begins, you're like, okay, he's gonna pull the block that tells him to kiss hot friend's friend, and it's gonna drive Nikki into a murderous rage, and that is what eventually happens. There's kind of a fun little twist because we get this weird Hansel and Gretel incest fanfic recitation thing that she does, and I was like, okay, that's kind of interesting in like a weird sort of demented kind of way. But it also tries to imply that there's maybe like more psychologically going on with this character, which again I do not buy, because none of it is motivated. love Zombie. So the fact that once you enter the scene and you realize what's going to happen, the scene just goes on and on. And I'm sure it's supposed to be tense, but yeah. Along those lines, another scene that drove me just fucking crazy, the letter scene. So after attractive friend is brutally murdered by Nikki and the body is disposed of, she called him there because she got her last letter in the mail from the colleges that she was applying for. This is her last chance to get into art school, and she's afraid to open the letter herself, so she gives it to Bear. And so now Bear has the letter, and it's covered in blood, and he's holding it in his hands, he's looking at it. And at that point, again, if you have any media literacy whatsoever, you know what the letter says, because it could only say that she was accepted, because that only heightens the tragedy of the scene. If it said that she wasn't accepted, of course, it would kind of deflate things, and that's not what we're here to do as screenwriters. So he's got this letter, he's holding it, you're like, okay, well, he's going to open it, he's going to read it, he's going to find that she's there, he's going to freak out. Boom. So he opens the letter, it's covered in blood. He looks at it. The movie is in a terrible situation because now they've asked their Zoomer audience to read. So they linger on this letter for like 10 full seconds. Probably the first 5 seconds of that is just to convince the audience they actually have to read it to get the full impact. I'm surprised he didn't read it aloud. I give them credit for that. So the next 5 seconds is them sounding out the first word, which is congratulations with an exclamation point, maybe 2 exclamation points, which is not how any acceptance letter I've ever seen begins. That's just not how they're written. It's pretty cartoonish. But if you're going to have them read a word and it's a long word, you might as well like get the message across right away. The letter says more shit, but ultimately it's just there long enough for people to commit to reading it and then reading it, which means it's on screen for like 10 laborious seconds. And I'm sitting there just like, I'm fucking counting. And then of course, the audience has read the letter or the first word, and so he puts the letter down and he freaks out in the car, and now we've got like 10 more seconds of him just like screaming, getting his Oscar moment. And the entire time I was begging for death. So yeah, this is the kind of thing I think about when I know people have seen this movie multiple times and they've told me like, yeah, I'm going back to see it again. And I'm like, I was suffering the first time I sat through this thing. I cannot imagine what it would be like if I already knew everything that was going to happen and just how long some of these scenes were going to go on for. Okay, on to my next point, which is that the director, Curry Barker, has been doing a lot of interviews that have crept into my news feed. So I see a lot of these headlines where he's talking about how, the modern generation is tired of slop cinema and they want something real with interesting storylines and connections, which right away is a little bit baffling to me for the reasons I've already stated. But it's a sentiment that is echoed by the audience that is responding very well to this movie. So I have to confront the notion that this movie is doing things for people that they don't feel like they're getting anywhere else. And to that, I have to say this is an issue of like media illiteracy, because there's a lot of amazing stuff out there that's not even that old or out of date that tackles these exact issues better than this movie does. And I have to wonder, why did this audience not find them? So let's talk about that a little bit. So when talking to women in my life about this movie, a lot of them have pointed out that the horror of it is not being trapped in a relationship with a psycho, which I think is actually is honestly from the writer-director's perspective, I think that's what they thought this movie was about, was just like, isn't it creepy to have a scary girlfriend? But for them, they point out that the real horror of the movie has to do with, the idea that she's trapped, that she lacks agency, she's trapped in her own body and forced to do things that she doesn't want to do, which is kind of scary. And I was thinking more about that. I say kind of scary. It's genuinely terrifying, and it is not a new idea. In 1999, there was a movie that came out called Being John Malkovich, which is, I don't think anyone would consider a horror movie, and it is weird as heck. The premise there is that John Cusack's character is sort of like a down on his luck loser, and he is in a relationship. Game on. So protagonist is in a relationship with a woman he doesn't really care for anymore. He's lusting after this hot woman at his work, but she's only interested in famous people. And through a twist of fate, there is a portal in this office building, and if you climb into the portal, you find yourself inside the body and mind of John Malkovich, the actor. And through this mechanism, our protagonist learns that he can kind of like possess and puppeteer John Malkovich, the actor, and through Malkovich, seduces this woman that he's obsessed with. For one thing, this movie is the first one that I've experienced that has this idea of like possession, loss of direct agency, in a way that I think is like truly terrifying, even if it's not always presented as exclusively terrifying in this movie. It is not a horror movie, like I said, but it is weird and it is fairly scary at a lot of points. But it happens to also be a good example of a movie about obsession and how actual, selfish desire can result in some truly fucking horrible things, and examines that with a little bit more care and characterization. So, I would recommend, if you are all interested, that you should check out Being John Malkovich from 1999. Okay, so that's not the only movie that has done this particular premise. Let's jump ahead a decade plus and talk about a little-known indie horror picture called Get Out. Probably the best horror movie that was made in the past decade. Which, if you'll remember, is about people basically being possessed and losing their agency as human beings, in a way that is actually critical to the plot and the themes of the story, and is heavily motivated by the main character and his own damage. Not to harp on a great movie that came out 10 years ago, but but in Get Out, you have a character who is basically, his sin is inaction, right? His mother died because he refused to acknowledge that there was something wrong happening outside his house. At the very beginning of the movie, he's pulled over by a racist cop, and his attitude is just like, let it happen. Don't rise to the bait. Don't give in to your outrage, and largely ignore the systemic racism that is just a feature of your life, because it's better to play it cool than it is to acknowledge that there's a lot of injustice that is happening and that you're the victim of that injustice. And the movie, the actual horror of that movie, is about basically surrendering control of your own body, becoming a passenger to someone else's life, to someone else's narrative. And that's kind of poignant, don't you think? This is an example of using the existential horror to mirror the actual real-world themes that you're trying to explore with your movie. I'm saying this because I know I sound like a crazy person, but this is not that complicated. It's kind of basic ABCs of storytelling. At the end of Get Out, when he goes on this crazy violent murder rampage, it's not just cathartic and fun because it's bloody. It's cathartic and fun because it's him actually breaking out of that mold of inaction, taking action, non-politically correct action, standing up for himself and striking out against the people that would use him as a person. That is, I don't know. That works, man. That's storytelling. That's how it should make you feel. Was there any points in Obsession where you went, oh shit, fuck yeah? No. I mean, maybe. It wasn't for me, and I think that a large part of that is because you couldn't care about these characters. They weren't real characters. Okay. That brings us to current events. 2025, we have the movie Companion. And this is the most interesting feature on this list, because Companion is a movie that is specifically about obsessive, codependent relationships. It is also a suspense thriller that is wildly funny and has some extreme moments of gore and violence in it, and also did basically no business when it came out. And I have real trouble reconciling that. So maybe we can work through it together, right? Let's talk about this. Because again, so much of what people claim to love about Obsession, I think is actually done correctly with this movie Companion. And again, Obsession is this huge cultural phenomena. Companion did basically nothing. Valentine's Day money. So the setup for Companion is that our main character is a woman in love with a man, except she's actually a sex robot who has been programmed to love Jack Quaid. Sorry, Jack. So what you actually see, you get this sort of like romantic idealized fantasy relationship from her perspective, and then it kind of peels back more and more as you realize that her beloved is actually this incredibly shitty nice guy piece of crap, and that their relationship is entirely this scam. um, I already said that I think it's really good. I think it is really good. I think it's really fun. It also has a theme, and that is exploring the horrible outcomes of boxing a person into a very narrow definition of what a romantic fantasy should be, right? It's almost the opposite of Obsession, where Obsession is a character that we see as a real human being and then is stripped of all agency instantly and irrevocably for the rest of the film. In this movie, we start with a character who has absolutely nothing, no independence whatsoever and no mind, and then she sort of develops into an actual person, and learns some very hard lessons, and then gets just cathartic bloody revenge in a way that is fun and meaningful. So why did that succeed, or why didn't that succeed where Obsession succeeded? And my theory is that I think it comes down to the marketing. I think that Companion didn't have a scene in the trailer where a girl with dirty hair and a bloody face makes a too wide, creepy, psycho little sister smile. And I think that's just what this audience wants, right? Hey Beans, how you doing? We've been out here for a while. It's time to wrap this up. But yes, so Companion is taking these ideas and is actually exploring like the ways in which codependency and relationships can be horrifying, whereas Obsession is basically just saying, "Bro, isn't it crazy? Girls are psycho, aren't they? Ha!" And I don't think that is actually very interesting, provocative, or meaningful.